Gosh, I was late. Again, racing through San Francisco International Airport, my heels clicking furiously against the polished floor, I silently cursed myself for hitting that snooze button one too many times. The medical conference in Los Angeles wasn't going to wait for me, and neither was my flight. As I approached the rideshare pickup area, I spotted a sleek black Tesla pulling up. A tall blonde woman, probably in her mid-50s, gracefully stepped out, her green eyes scanning the crowd. Our gazes locked, and I felt an inexplicable flutter in my chest. "Excuse me," I called out, slightly out of breath. "Are you headed to Lax?" She raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement dancing in her eyes. "As a matter of fact, I am. Care to join me?" I hesitated for a moment, weighing the oddity of sharing a 3-hour ride with a complete stranger against the certainty of missing my flight. The woman's warm smile tipped the scales. "I am Claire," I said, extending my hand. "Dr. Claire Green." "Penelope Allen," she replied, her grip firm and confident. "Pleasure to meet you, doctor." As we settled into the back seat, I couldn't help but notice the subtle scent of her perfume. Something floral with a hint of spice. It was oddly comforting. "So, what brings a doctor to LA on such short notice?" Penelope asked, breaking the silence as we merged onto the highway. I laughed, running a hand through my brunette locks. "A gynecology conference. Thrilling stuff, I am sure you can imagine." "Oh, I don't know," she teased, her green eyes twinkling. "I find the human body quite fascinating." There was something in the way she said it that made me blush. I quickly changed the subject, asking about her own journey. As the miles flew by, our conversation flowed effortlessly. Penelope, I learned, was a retired corporate executive who now spent her time consulting for nonprofits. She had a quick wit and a laugh that sent shivers down my spine. We shared stories of our lives in San Francisco, discovering we both lived in the Marina District. As she spoke about her favorite hidden gems in the city, I found myself hanging on her every word, captivated by the passion in her voice. The coastal highway stretched before us, a ribbon of asphalt hugging the curves of the Pacific. Sunlight danced on the waves, and for a moment, I forgot about the conference entirely, lost in the easy rhythm of our chat. "You know," Penelope mused, gazing out at the ocean, "I've always believed that the best adventures start with a leap of faith." I turned to look at her, struck by the depth of emotion in her eyes. "Is that what this is? An adventure?" She smiled enigmatically. "That depends on you, Dr. Green." As we neared Lax, I felt a pang of regret that our journey was coming to an end. There was something about Penelope that intrigued me, a magnetic pull I couldn't quite explain. "Listen," I said, fumbling in my purse for a business card, "if you are ever in need of a gynecologist." I trailed off, realizing how ridiculous that sounded. Penelope laughed, a rich, melodious sound that made my heart skip a beat. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, taking the card. She then pulled out her own, pressing it into my palm. "And if you ever need a drinking buddy, or a tour guide to those hidden gems I mentioned, give me a call." Our fingers brushed as we exchanged cards, and I felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with static. As we said our goodbyes at the airport, I found myself hoping that this wouldn't be the last time our paths crossed. Little did I know, fate had much bigger plans for us. As I watched Penelope disappear into the crowd, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change in ways I never expected. The adventure, it seemed, was just beginning. Weeks after my chance encounter with Penelope, I found myself in a very different setting. The Lavender Room, a dimly lit lesbian bar in the Castro, was a far cry from the sterile halls of the hospital where I spent most of my days. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and my mountain of medical school debt wasn't going to pay itself off. It was a quiet Thursday night, and I was wiping down the bar for what felt like the 100th time when the door chimed. I looked up, hoping for a customer to break the monotony, but instead, my heart nearly stopped. There, silhouetted in the doorway, was Penelope Allen. She spotted me immediately, her green eyes widening in surprise. Dr. Green, she said, a smile playing on her lips. I didn't expect to find you here. I felt my cheeks flush. I am just moonlighting, she finished for me, sliding onto a bar stool. Don't worry, your secret's safe with me. She winked and I felt that same flutter in my chest I'd experienced during our ride to LA. As I mixed her requested gin and tonic, we fell into easy conversation. Penelope had a way of making me feel completely at ease, despite the unexpectedness of our reunion. She told me about her latest consulting project, and I found myself sharing stories about my patients, keeping things confidential, of course. Time seemed to fly by, and before I knew it, last call was approaching. The bar had filled up a bit with a handful of regulars nursing their drinks in the corners. Penelope was in the middle of telling me about her travels in Europe when a commotion at the door caught my attention. A man burst in, his face obscured by a ski mask. My blood ran cold as I saw the glint of metal in his hand. Everyone on the ground, this is a robbery. Panic erupted. Glasses shattered as patrons dove for cover. I froze, my mind blank with fear. But Penelope was a force of nature. In one fluid motion she stood and turned to face the robber. You really don't want to do this, she said, her voice calm but steely. The man faltered, clearly not expecting resistance. I said, on the ground. Penelope took a step forward. Think about what you are doing. Is this really worth ruining your life over? I wanted to scream at her to get down, to stop putting herself in danger, but I was paralyzed, watching the scene unfold like a terrifying movie. The robber's hand shook. I need the money. There are other ways, Penelope said softly, taking another step. Ways that don't involve hurting anyone. Put the gun down and we can talk about it. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then slowly the man lowered the weapon. Penelope closed the distance between them, gently taking the gun and placing it on the bar. As if a spell had been broken, everything burst into motion. Someone had called the police, and soon the bar was filled with flashing lights and uniformed officers. I found myself giving a statement, my hands still shaking. When I finally had a moment to breathe, I looked for Penelope. She was talking to a detective, her posture relaxed as if disarming armed robbers was just another Thursday night for her. As the chaos began to die down, she made her way back to me. Are you all right? She asked, genuine concern in her eyes. I nodded, still in disbelief. How did you do that? Weren't you scared? Penelope smiled, a hint of sadness in her expression. Of course I was scared. But sometimes, you have to be brave even when you are terrified. In that moment, looking at this incredible woman who had just saved not only me but everyone in the bar, I felt something shift inside me. It was more than admiration or gratitude. It was a spark, a beginning of something I couldn't yet name. As we stepped out into the cool San Francisco night, Penelope turned to me. I think we both could use a drink after that. What do you say we find a place that's not, well, a crime scene? I laughed. The tension of the night finally breaking. I know just the place, I said, leading her towards my favorite all-night diner. As we walked, our shoulders brushing, I couldn't help but feel that this night, as terrifying as it had been, was the start of something extraordinary. Little did I know how right I was, or how deeply Penelope Allen would change my life. The neon signs of the city blurred around us, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. And in that moment, I realized I never wanted this night to end. The fluorescent lights of the clinic seemed harsher than usual as I trudged through my morning rounds. My mind kept drifting back to that night at the Lavender Room, to Penelope's bravery, to the way her eyes had sparkled over 3 a.m. pancakes as we talked until dawn. We'd exchanged numbers again, but I hadn't worked up the courage to call her yet. What would I even say? Thanks for saving my life. Want to grab coffee? I was so lost in thought that I almost collided with Holly, my head nurse, as I rounded the corner. Whoa there, Dr. Green. She laughed, steadying me. You looked a million miles away. Hot date on your mind. I felt my cheeks flush. What? No, I just didn't sleep well. Holly raised an eyebrow but mercifully let it drop. Well, wake up, sunshine. You got a new patient in exam room 3. Routine checkup. I nodded, grateful for the distraction, and made my way to the exam room. I knocked briefly before entering, my eyes on the chart in my hands. Good morning. I am Dr. Green, and I'll be... The words died in my throat as I looked up and saw Penelope Allen perched on the exam table, a mischievous glint in her green eyes. Hello, doctor, she said smoothly. Fancy meeting you here. I stood there frozen, my mind racing. This was my patient. I was her doctor. The ethical implications alone were enough to make my head spin. But underneath the professional panic was a thrill I couldn't quite suppress. Penelope, I managed to say, my voice sounding strangled even to my own ears. I wasn't expecting to see you here, she smiled, and I swear the room got a little brighter. Well, someone did give me their card and suggest I stop by if I ever needed a gynecologist. I felt my face burn even hotter. Right, of course. I cleared my throat, trying to regain some semblance of professionalism. So what brings you in today? As I went through the routine examination, I tried to keep things clinical, detached. But every time our eyes met, I felt that same electric tension from the night at the bar, when my fingers brushed her skin during the breast exam. I could have sworn I heard her breath catch. Everything looks good, I said, my voice slightly hoarse as I finished up. Do you have any questions or concerns? Penelope's gaze held mine, and for a moment, the air between us felt charged with unspoken possibilities. Just one, she said softly. Are you free for dinner tonight? My heart raced. This was crossing a line, wasn't it? But gosh, I wanted to say yes more than I'd wanted anything in a long time. Penelope, I am your doctor. It wouldn't be ethical for me to... She held up a hand, cutting me off. I understand, but I'm only in town for a few more days, and I'd hate to miss the chance to thank you properly for your professional services. The way she said, professional services, made it clear she was talking about more than just today's exam. I found myself nodding before I could overthink it. Okay, dinner, but just as friends, right? Penelope's smile was enigmatic as she slid off the exam table. Of course, Dr. Green, just friends. As she left, I collapsed into my chair, my head spinning. What was I getting myself into? The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, seeing patients and filling out charts, but my mind was elsewhere. By the time I locked up my office, I was a bundle of nerves. As I gathered my things, I noticed a folded piece of paper that had been slipped under my door. My heart raced as I unfolded it, recognizing Penelope's elegant handwriting. Claire, meet me at Green's restaurant at 8 p.m. Wear something nice. I stared at the note, a mix of excitement and trepidation swirling in my stomach. This was more than just a thank you dinner between friends, wasn't it? And despite every logical part of my brain screaming that this was a bad idea, I couldn't wait. As I left the clinic, the San Francisco fog was rolling in, shrouding the city in mystery. It felt fitting somehow. I was stepping into uncharted territory, letting myself be drawn into Penelope's orbit, and as terrifying as it was, I'd never felt more alive. I hurried home to change my mind, already racing with possibilities. What would tonight bring? And more importantly, was I ready for whatever it was? As I slipped into my favorite black dress, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My blue eyes were bright with anticipation, my cheeks flushed. I hardly recognized myself. For the first time in years, I looked excited, alive. Whatever happened tonight, I realized there was no going back. Penelope Allen had waltzed into my life and turned everything upside down. And as I stepped out into the foggy San Francisco night, I found that I didn't mind one bit. The Greens restaurant was buzzing with energy as I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I spotted Penelope immediately, her blonde hair catching the soft candlelight. She stood to greet me, and I felt my breath catch. She was stunning in a tailored suit that accentuated her curves in all the right places. Claire, she said warmly, pulling me into a brief hug. You look beautiful. I felt myself blush as we sat down. You clean up pretty well yourself, I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. As we settled into our seats, I couldn't help but notice the curious glances from nearby diners. I wondered what they saw. Two friends having dinner or something more. The waiter arrived with menus, and Penelope ordered a bottle of wine with the confidence of someone used to fine dining. As he poured, she raised her glass in a toast. To new beginnings, she said, her green eyes twinkling. I clinked my glass against hers, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach. To new beginnings, I echoed. As we ate, our conversation flowed easily, just as it had that night in the bar. Penelope told me about her travels, her eyes lighting up as she described the streets of Paris and the beaches of Bali. I found myself hanging on her every word, imagining what it would be like to see those places with her. What about you, Claire? She asked, leaning in. What dreams are you chasing? I hesitated, swirling the wine in my glass. Honestly, I am not sure anymore. I've been so focused on my career, on paying off my student loans. I haven't really thought about what I want beyond that. Penelope reached across the table, her hand covering mine. The touch sent sparks through my body. It's never too late to start dreaming, she said softly. As we finished our meal, I found myself acutely aware of the age difference between us. Penelope exuded a confidence and worldliness that both intimidated and attracted me. I wondered what she could possibly see in me, a workaholic doctor still figuring out her place in the world. Penny, for your thoughts? Penelope's voice broke through my reverie. I took a deep breath. I was just thinking about us, about what people might say if they knew. Penelope's expression softened. Claire, I've spent too much of my life worrying about what other people think. At my age, you learn that happiness is too precious to sacrifice for the sake of appearances. Her words struck a chord in me. I realized that I'd been holding back, not just with Penelope, but in so many aspects of my life, always worried about meeting others' expectations. As we left the restaurant, Penelope suggested a walk. The fog had lifted, revealing a sky full of stars. We strolled along the waterfront, our hands brushing occasionally, sending little jolts of electricity through me each time. We ended up at Land's End, the waves crashing against the cliffs below us. Penelope turned to me, her expression serious in the moonlight. Claire, I need to be honest with you, she said. I'm not looking for a casual fling. I'm too old for games. If we're going to explore this, whatever this is between us, I want it to be real. I felt my heart racing. This was it, the moment of truth. I could walk away now, go back to my safe, predictable life, or I could take a leap into the unknown. I want that too, I whispered, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Penelope's smile was radiant. She stepped closer, her hand coming up to cup my cheek. May I kiss you, Dr. Green? I nodded, unable to form words. And then her lips were on mine, soft and insistent. The world fell away, and all I could feel was Penelope, her warmth, her scent, the way her body fit perfectly against mine. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, I felt like I was seeing the world in color for the first time. Penelope rested her forehead against mine, her thumb tracing my lower lip. Wow, I breathed, she chuckled. Wow, oh indeed. As we made our way back to the city, hand in hand, I felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. What would this mean for my career? How would my family react? But looking at Penelope, seeing the joy in her eyes that I knew was mirrored in my own, I realized that some things were worth the risk. Back at my apartment, we shared one more passionate kiss before saying goodnight. As I watched Penelope's cab disappear into the night, I touched my lips, still tingling from her kiss. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain: my life would never be the same again. Lying in bed that night, I replayed every moment of our evening together. The way Penelope's eyes crinkled when she laughed, the feel of her hand in mine, the taste of her lips. For the first time in years, I fell asleep with a smile on my face, eager to see what tomorrow would bring. The weeks following that magical night at Land's End were a whirlwind of stolen moments and secret smiles. Penelope and I fell into a rhythm, sneaking lunch dates between my appointments and spending evenings exploring the hidden corners of San Francisco. Each day, I found myself falling deeper, marveling at how perfectly we fit together despite our differences. But as with any secret, the weight of hiding our relationship began to take its toll. I caught myself checking over my shoulder before leaning in for a kiss or tensing up when colleagues asked about my personal life. Penelope, ever perceptive, noticed my unease. "We don't have to hide, you know," she said one evening as we cuddled on my couch, a half-empty bottle of wine on the coffee table. "I am not ashamed of us," I sighed, burying my face in her neck. "It's not that simple. There are ethical considerations, my career." Penelope pulled back, her green eyes searching mine. "Claire, are you happy with me?" "Happier than I've ever been," I answered without hesitation. She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Then that's all that matters. The rest, we'll figure it out together." Her confidence was infectious, and I found myself believing her. Maybe it really could be that simple. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It started with a note. I found it slipped under my office door one morning, the paper cheap and the handwriting messy. "Dyke doctors don't belong here. Watch your back." My blood ran cold as I read it, then read it again, hoping I'd somehow misunderstood, but the words remained ugly and threatening. I told myself it was probably just a prank, some immature intern with too much time on their hands. But I couldn't shake the unease that settled over me like a shroud. I didn't tell Penelope. I didn't want to worry her, and part of me hoped that if I ignored it, it would go away. But it didn't. More notes followed, each more vicious than the last. They appeared in my locker, under my windshield wiper, even slipped into the pocket of my lab coat when I wasn't looking. "Disgusting lesies like you make me sick. Go back to the bar where you belong. Your patients deserve better than a pervert, doctor." Each one felt like a physical blow chipping away at the confidence and happiness I'd built with Penelope. I started jumping at shadows, second-guessing every interaction with my colleagues and patients. It all came to a head one rainy afternoon. I was leaving the clinic, my mind so preoccupied with the latest threatening note that I didn't notice the figure lurking in the shadows of the parking garage. "Dr. Green." I whirled around, my heart pounding. A man stepped into the dim light, his face twisted with disgust. I recognized him immediately. Marcus Allen, Penelope's ex-husband. "Mr. Allen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you with something?" He sneered, taking a step closer. "You can stay the hell away from my wife." "Ex-wife," I corrected before I could stop myself. "And Penelope is free to make her own choices." His face contorted with rage. "You think you are so clever, don't you? Seducing a vulnerable woman, turning her against her family, her faith." I backed away, fumbling for my phone. "Mr. Allen, I think you should leave." He lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. "Not until you understand. Penelope belongs with me, with a man. What you are doing, it's unnatural, sick." Fear and anger battled within me. I wrenched my arm free, my voice shaking. "What's sick is harassing and threatening someone because you can't accept that your ex-wife has moved on. Now leave before I call security." For a moment, I thought he might hit me, but then he stepped back, his eyes cold. "This isn't over, Dr. Green. I won't let you ruin Penelope's life." As he stalked away, I sagged against my car, my legs trembling. The pieces fell into place. The notes, the threats. It had been Marcus all along. I drove to Penelope's apartment in a daze, my mind racing. How could I tell her? Would she believe me? What if this drove her away? But when she opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into her arms, I knew I had to trust in us, in what we built together. Through tears, I told her everything, the notes, the confrontation with Marcus, my fears. Penelope listened, her face a mix of anger and concern. When I finished, she cupped my face in her hands, her touch achingly gentle. "Claire, I am so sorry you've been dealing with this alone. But listen to me, Marcus, the threats, none of it matters. What matters is us. I love you and I am not going anywhere." The words hung in the air between us, heady with promise. It was the first time either of us had said, "I love you," and despite everything, my heart soared. "I love you too," I whispered, and then her lips were on mine, fierce and protective. As the rain pattered against the windows, we held each other close, both of us understanding that this was just the beginning of our fight. But in that moment, wrapped in Penelope's arms, I knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together. And that was enough. The morning after my confrontation with Marcus, I woke to find Penelope already dressed, pacing the bedroom with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low and intense, and I caught snatches of legal jargon that made my head spin. "Everything okay?" I asked as she hung up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Penelope sat on the edge of the bed, taking my hand in hers. That was my lawyer, refiling for a restraining order against Marcus. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a wave of guilt. "Pen, I am so sorry. I never meant to come between you and your ex-husband." She silenced me with a kiss. "You have nothing to apologize for. Marcus made his choices. Now, we make ours." As I got ready for work, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles. I was right. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings and hushed conversations with the hospital administration. Word of Marcus's harassment had spread, and suddenly my personal life was the hottest topic of hospital gossip. I tried to keep my head down to focus on my patients, but I could feel the weight of judgment everywhere I turned. Whispers followed me down the hallways, and more than once I walked into a room to find conversations abruptly halted. It all came to a head during a meeting with the hospital's ethics board. I sat across from a panel of stern-faced doctors, their disapproving gazes making me feel like I was on trial. "Dr. Green," the chief of staff began, his voice dripping with forced politeness. "We called you here to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your recent behavior." I straightened my spine, channeling Penelope's unwavering confidence. "With all due respect, sir, my personal life has no bearing on my abilities as a doctor." A woman to his left, Dr. Simmons, leaned forward. "But when your personal choices affect the reputation of this hospital—" "My personal choices," I interrupted, anger flaring in my chest. "You mean my relationship with a woman? Because I can assure you, my sexual orientation has no impact on my medical skills or my dedication to my patients." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. I held my breath, waiting for the axe to fall. To my surprise, it was Holly, my head nurse, who spoke up from the back of the room. "If I may, I've worked with Dr. Green for years. She's one of the most compassionate and skilled physicians I've ever known. Her patients adore her. Are we really going to let outdated prejudices override that?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and I felt a surge of gratitude for Holly's support. The chief of staff cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Well, perhaps we've been hasty in our judgment. Dr. Green, you are dismissed for now. We'll continue to monitor the situation." I left the meeting, feeling shaken but determined. I wouldn't let them push me out or force me back into the closet. That evening, Penelope and I attended a charity gala for the hospital. I'd been dreading it, knowing the rumors and stares we'd face, but Penelope insisted we go heads held high. "We have nothing to be ashamed of," she said as we stepped out of the car, resplendent in a shimmering gold gown. "Let them talk." As we entered the ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd. I could feel all eyes on us, judging, speculating. But then Penelope took my hand, squeezing it gently, and suddenly none of it mattered. We made our way through the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, stopping to chat with colleagues and benefactors alike. To my surprise, many were warm and supportive, congratulating us on our relationship. As the night wore on, I began to relax, buoyed by Penelope's unwavering presence at my side. We were swaying gently to the music when I spotted Marcus across the room, his face twisted with disgust. Before I could react, Penelope was moving, pulling me towards the stage where the band was playing. She whispered something to the lead singer, who nodded with a smile. May I have everyone's attention, please? Penelope's voice rang out over the microphone, silencing the room. I have something I'd like to say. My heart raced as she turned to face me, her green eyes shining with determination. Dr. Claire Green, she began, her voice full of emotion. You are the most incredible woman I have ever known. Your compassion, your strength, your unwavering dedication to your patients and to those you love. You inspire me every day. Tears pricked at my eyes as she continued, her words washing over me like a balm. I know we face challenges, and I am sure there are more to come, but I want everyone here to know that I love you, Claire, completely and without reservation, and I am proud to stand by your side no matter what anyone thinks. The room erupted in applause, drowning out the few scattered boos and mutters of disapproval. Penelope pulled me close, kissing me deeply, and in that moment I felt invincible. As we broke apart, breathless and grinning, I caught sight of Marcus storming out of the ballroom. But for once I didn't feel fear or shame, I felt only love, and a fierce determination to fight for what we had. Later that night, as we slow danced in Penelope's candlelit penthouse, I knew that no matter what obstacles we faced, we'd face them together, and that was all that mattered. The weeks following the charity gala were a whirlwind of emotions. Penelope's public declaration of love had sent ripples through both our personal and professional lives. At the hospital, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. While some colleagues still avoided eye contact, many more offered warm smiles and words of support. It felt like we turned a corner, but I knew better than to let my guard down completely. One crisp Saturday morning, as Penelope and I strolled hand in hand through the farmer's market, my phone buzzed. The caller ID made my heart skip a beat. Mom. I should take this, I said, squeezing Penelope's hand before stepping away. Hi, Mom, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Claire, honey, my mother's voice crackled through the speaker. Your father and I are in town. Surprise. My stomach dropped. Oh, wow. When did you get here? Just now. We're heading to your place. See you in 20. The line went dead before I could respond. I turned to Penelope, panic rising in my chest. My parents are here. They're on their way to my apartment. Right now. Penelope's eyes widened, but she quickly composed herself. Okay, deep breaths. We can handle this. The drive back to my place was a blur of anxiety and hasty planning. We agreed that Penelope would wait nearby while I talked to my parents alone. It wasn't ideal, but I wasn't ready to spring my relationship on them without warning. I barely had time to straighten up before the doorbell rang. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to find my parents beaming at me. Surprise! They chorused, enveloping me in a group hug. As we settled in the living room with coffee, I could feel my mother's eyes taking in every detail of my apartment, looking for clues about my life. So, honey, she began, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. How have you been? Any special someone in your life? I took a sip of coffee to buy myself time. Actually, Mom, Dad, there is someone, and it's serious. My father leaned forward, a smile spreading across his face. That's wonderful, sweetie. When do we get to meet him? The moment of truth had arrived. I set down my mug, my hands trembling slightly. It's not a him, Dad. Her name is Penelope, and I love her. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, confusion, disappointment. My father just stared, his expression unreadable. Is this why you've been so distant lately? My mother finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, tears pricking at my eyes. I wanted to tell you, but I was scared. I didn't know how you'd react. My father cleared his throat. How long have you known? I've always known, Dad. I just didn't have the courage to admit it even to myself until I met Penelope. Another heavy silence fell. I could see my parents struggling to process this revelation, to reconcile the daughter they thought they knew with the woman sitting before them now. I think we need some air, my mother said abruptly, standing up. We'll talk more later. As they left, I collapsed onto the couch, emotionally drained. I texted Penelope, who arrived minutes later, wrapping me in a comforting embrace. They didn't take it well. I mumbled into her shoulder. Penelope stroked my hair. Give them time. It's a lot to process. The rest of the day passed in a haze of worry and what-ifs. As evening fell, Penelope suggested we take a walk to clear our heads. We ended up at Fisherman's Wharf, the salty sea air, and the chatter of tourists providing a welcome distraction. As we leaned against the railing watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I spotted two familiar figures approaching. "Mom! Dad!" I called out surprised. They walked up to us looking sheepish. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, and my father seemed to have aged years in just a few hours. "We've been walking around all day talking," my father began, "and we realized something. We love you, Claire, no matter what." My mother stepped forward, taking my hands in hers. "We may not understand everything right now, but we want to try. Can you introduce us to Penelope?" Tears of relief sprang to my eyes as I turned to Penelope. "Mom, Dad, this is Penelope, the woman I love." Penelope stepped forward, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you both. I've heard so much about you." As my parents shook Penelope's hand, albeit a bit stiffly, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Overcome with emotion, I pulled Penelope close and kissed her right there in front of my parents and all of Fisherman's Wharf. As our lips met, I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath, but I didn't care. This was who I was, who we were, and I was done hiding. When we broke apart, I saw a mix of emotions on my parents' faces. Discomfort, yes, but also a glimmer of understanding. My father even managed a small smile. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "how about dinner? I think we all have a lot to talk about," as we walked towards a nearby restaurant. Penelope's hand in mine and my parents following close behind, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead might be bumpy, but for the first time, I felt like I could truly be myself with the people I loved most in the world. That night, as Penelope and I lay tangled in each other's arms, the moonlight streaming through the window, I felt a sense of completeness I'd never known before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew we'd face them together, stronger than ever. Months flew by in a whirlwind of love and newfound acceptance. Penelope and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm, our lives intertwining in ways I never thought possible. The hospital had become a safe haven, with most of my colleagues rallying around us after witnessing our love story unfold. One lazy Sunday morning, as we lounged in bed, Penelope turned to me, with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Let's go out tonight." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, where to?" She grinned. "The lavender room." My heart skipped a beat. We hadn't been back there since that fateful night of the robbery. "Are you sure?" Penelope nodded, her fingers tracing patterns on my arm. "It's where our story really began. I think it's time we revisited it, don't you?" That evening, we stepped into the lavender room hand in hand. The familiar scent of stale beer and perfume washed over me, bringing back a flood of memories. But this time, instead of fear or uncertainty, I felt only joy and pride. We made our way to the bar, where the barter, a new faith, greeted us with a smile. "What can I get you ladies?" "2 gin and tonics," Penelope ordered, winking at me. As we sipped our drinks, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we'd come. The woman beside me, who had once been a mysterious stranger in a shared ride, was now the center of my world. "Dance with me," Penelope whispered, pulling me towards the small dance floor. As we swayed to the music, bodies pressed close, I felt Penelope's heartbeat quicken. She pulled back slightly, her green eyes searching mine. "Claire," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me what true love really means: acceptance, support, and the courage to be unapologetically ourselves." My breath caught in my throat as Penelope reached into her pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "I had a whole speech planned," she laughed nervously, "but being here in the place where our journey began, I realized that sometimes the simplest words are the most powerful. She opened the box, revealing a stunning emerald ring. Claire Green, will you marry me? Time seemed to stand still as the world around us faded away. Tears of joy blurred my vision as I nodded emphatically. Yes, I whispered, 1,000 times yes. Penelope slipped the ring onto my finger, and as our lips met in a passionate kiss, the bar erupted in cheers and applause. We broke apart, laughing and crying, to find ourselves surrounded by well-wishers, including Holly and several of my hospital colleagues who had become regulars at the Lavender Room. As the night wore on, we celebrated with friends old and new, our hearts full of love and hope for the future. When we finally stepped out into the cool San Francisco night, Penelope pulled me close. "How about we recreate our first kiss?" she suggested, a twinkle in her eye. Hand in hand we made our way to Land's End. The moon hung low over the Pacific, casting a silver path across the water. As we stood at the spot where we had first acknowledged our feelings, I felt a sense of coming full circle. Penelope cupped my face in her hands, her touch as electric as it had been that first night. "I love you, Dr. Claire Green," she murmured. "And I love you, Penelope Allen," I replied, my heart soaring. Our lips met in a kiss that was both familiar and thrilling, filled with promises of the life we would build together. As we broke apart, breathless and gidding, I couldn't help but laugh. "What's so funny?" Penelope asked, her arms still wrapped around me. I shook my head, grinning. "I was just thinking about how this all started with a shared ride in the gin and tonic." Penelope chuckled. "Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories have the most ordinary beginnings." As we made our way back home to our home, I felt a sense of peace and rightness that I'd never known before. The road hadn't been easy, and I knew we'd face more challenges in the future. But with Penelope by my side, I was ready for anything. Epilogue. 1 year later, we stood on a sun-drenched beach, surrounded by our closest friends and family. My parents, who had come so far in their journey of acceptance, beamed with pride as they walked me down the aisle. As we exchanged vows, the sound of the waves a gentle backdrop to our promises, I looked into Penelope's eyes and saw our whole future reflected there, a lifetime of love, laughter, and unwavering support. "I now pronounce you wife and wife," the officiant declared. And as we sealed our union with a kiss, I knew that this was just the beginning of our greatest adventure yet. Later, as we danced under the stars, Penelope leaned in close. "So, Dr. Green Allen, was it worth it? All the struggles, the fear, the uncertainty." I pulled her closer, my heart full to bursting. "Every single moment," I whispered. "I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." As the night wore on and our guests celebrated around us, Penelope and I stood at the water's edge, hands intertwined. The moon cast its gentle light over the waves, and I was struck by the beauty of the moment and the beauty of the life we had built together. "Ready for our next chapter?" Penelope asked, squeezing my hand. I smiled, feeling the weight of my wedding ring a perfect match to my engagement ring on my finger. "With you, always." And as we walked back to join our loved ones, I knew that, whatever the future held, we would face it together, two hearts beating as one, in a love story that was only just beginning.